All right, yeah. Okay, so the next question is, so we talk about European nations, and we've got, so obviously Europe is filled with these different nations, but was Australia one great nation, or was it a massive continent filled, was it like Europe? Did it have lots and lots of different nations?
It wasn't one nation, but it was one estate. It seems to me one of the key things about how Aboriginal people look at the world is the importance of the spiritual way of looking at it. The importance of the creators, the ancestors, the necessity to explain what the country looks like. How and why particular features, both big ones and little ones, came into being. And the really interesting thing about that is it's true all over Australia, including Tasmania, which has been separated for, 11,000 years. But still, they have the same beliefs, the same view. And that is the unifying principle. Nation doesn't go anywhere near it. It's political and military. Yeah. This is spiritual and permanent. And in that sense, it was one community, one philosophy.
Dave, what do you reckon?
I think that's a wonderful answer, and it goes back to that knowing country on that, whether it's hunter-gatherer or that. And I'm not a lawman, but I've got, and Bill's certainly met a number, we've had this discussion, but my colleague Sam Wickman has allowed me to have little snippets of them, and it is that connection. Not answering that specifically, we do know, I'll tell you a quick story about this connection across. We do know that within the laws there are east-west, they follow water holes, they follow the channel country, but there's an east-west. Old senior WA countryman David Muljarley has done a map on the route, the water thing. So I never knew there is an east-west, but there's a north-south, and there's through law there is an interconnection. And here's one example: was the Wodja filled Obar in the 80s. In the 1850s, the Europeans were coming up from New South Wales and the black trackers, and they were dispersing and doing all the massacres. The mob just west of Mackay, the Wodja, heard of this, so they sent 3 young fellows over with their law and ceremony through their red ochre, going across to the Kimberley, we were told. And in 1980, 150 years later, some senior lawmen from the Kimberley came over to the Wodja and brought back their ceremony. And now they're back in with their full ceremony back from there. This is the interconnection that's still there. We don't know unless you're in that, you've gone through law, then your place becomes defined. And there's a lot of human knowledge, as we know. But I've also told by Phil Obar, the red ochre, and that's the desert mob, who have the strictest laws because of the arid environments, etc. And they overpower everyone else. Still hold the Tasmanian ceremonies.
Oh, jeez, that's crazy. But what about because there clearly are there's group identities.
I agree. It's a state and interconnection with language groups, and now a bit like state of origin. Murray, Koori. So we're evolving the world too, but and I think that's that philosophy or approach to country and family that is something that we can all share with all Australians, and something that certainly at this time environment, I think we all owe it to ourselves and our kids to look after our country.
Yeah.
I think Dick Smith is right about looking after our prime crop farming areas that we're really developing for real estate. With this change, we may well need it.
Well, I think we need to get more help from Aboriginal people, especially about fire.
Yeah.
We can't do it. That's obvious. Look at all the money, the planes, the equipment, the communications that was spent in the last 6 months over Black Summer. Not one fire was put out by whitefellas. Not one big fire.
We appreciate the works they do, but one of the efforts is that, and that's, I say, it's often a retired men's shed, and we owe it to ourselves and everyone to take a leaf out of the book of our, our knowledge from our, our custodians.
And that's only the obvious thing. There are also protecting species, preventing extinctions, other examples.
So one great estate, but
yes.
I mean archaeologically we know, for example, that you've got very clear rock art regions, and so going back 10,000 years, so those the dynamic figures in Arnhem Land, and then you've got very, very different rock art going on in obviously Western Australia, the Kimberley, all of this. But then you've got,
pesky quinkers.
Exactly. But then you've got all these really interesting style boundaries. So Paul Tayson wrote a fascinating paper where he looked at a gorge, and on one side of the gorge there was a very sort of clear rock art style, and then on the other side of the gorge, totally different. And that also mirrored clan boundaries of the... So what do you think about that? Maybe shall I start with you, Bill? Do you see within this estate that there were...
Well, I can think of another example just off the Northern Flinders Ranges, where there's a gorge that different paintings on either side. Conversely, up in the back of the Sepik, there are paintings, if you looked at them, you'd say they're Aboriginal. Absolutely Aboriginal, but of course...
Well, there's boomerangs in West Papua, isn't there?
Yeah.
So paintings of boomerangs,
But all societies change.
That's it.
All societies change.
Yeah.
And you think of the great environmental differences that Aboriginal people have been through in 65,000 years. Of course they're going to change to deal with that. That's a great skill, dealing with the environment. And so I don't know what gaps there are between one style and another. The nearest analogy I can get is pretty well useless, which is that you'll get a song, say, developed up around Borroloola, that finishes up in Albany in Western Australia. In other words, knowledge and ceremony and particular ways of celebrating things travelled in 1688. Did they 10,000 years ago? I can't say, but it gives you the insight into the possibility.
I totally agree with Bill. All societies, people are fluid, and it's individuals make a difference. It's leadership and who's those ties, who fell in love with someone across the way. And then there was a war. There are natural boundaries. However, people are fluid. Our thoughts, and so too have the innovations within our country and adapting. So, we've had dingoes, things coming in. So there is that change, and it's hard because we go 1788, bang, and then we have, the impacts of that. So the Ngunnawal were coming raiding over into Boomerang country, or the Kamilaroi were raiding all the way down into Radford, and that we have a sort of ethno-historical records of that. To the extent of that, we don't know, but we do know styles. I'm not a rock art specialist at all. But the styles have changed in that over time. And
but it's not just changing, is it? Because there is different identities across this continent. There's got to be.
But there's also ones that there's the rock arts that old that the communities say, that's way before our memory time. They are part of that dreaming, because there's a particular style. But we know more about that. What's your view?
Well, I just see, obviously I'm seeing it from an archaeological perspective, and I see that what's going on in Eastern Torres Strait is very different from the communities up there, their social formation is very different from what it is in even Western Torres Strait, where it's so very much agricultural communities in the Eastern Torres Strait. They have very clear connections with Papua New Guinea. They have different totemic systems to what's,
Talking about art styles, it's also the case, as I'm sure you agree, that it depends on the local materials. I think of the Burra, where a style of pecking hardly changes. What they're pecking does, from sea to land and so on, and actually whether it's infilled or not might change. But the essential thing remains the same for what, 45,000 years? Ken Mulvaney says the oldest about 45,000 years, up to European times.
Yeah.
Same basic style. And one of the reasons is that the obvious canvas is the same rocks, the same style of rocks.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing can happen in other places. If you've got really good ochre, like a Parachulna, the gorge I was talking about uses that, and it's high class. It's high class stuff.
Yeah. But there's also people innovate differently. So just even a community within a broad area, when an archaeologist comes in there, they basically there's a consultative process about how we get in place and these kind of things. And then they will make decisions, just as when you've got these culture heroes coming in from New Guinea, different islands, you hear it in the stories, some accept them, some deny them completely, get rid of them, we don't want you here. And others take out different ceremonies from these culture heroes. And this archaeologically you can see it also. So it's also about just human nature. I mean, if you're going to have something coming into your community, you're going to...
Yeah. But you're not sowing a crop.
People think differently. That's very clear. Yeah. What's interesting about those changes is not so much why a new one comes in, but why an old one goes out.
Yeah.
It's been there for so long, and then at some point it gives way to a new thing.
Like the Lizard Island, the Peter Potter which we sent up north and got rid of. We didn't. No.
Yeah. Well, that's actually we're going into another.
Topic. Maybe we can cut that. Exactly my one. You can do it as you like. Someone said, "Well, why could our stuff have gone north? We don't actually look at it. It's also the questions we ask.
Yeah.
How we come in.
That's exactly the problem.
And I think Betty Me, and my great friend and mentor. I think her book Shell Bed to Shell Midden, she absorbed and looked and saw, she still had an analytical side of that, but it was, it was very much her learning and how the season, how many they were taking for family shells and species and, their day-to-day life and who was therefore observing that. But I think that's archaeology is looking at the objects and things, but that interpretation, I think we can still go back to talking, to communities and have that aspect. There's an amazing amount of knowledge in that catch and still. Which is
certainly we should ask the questions. Yeah.
And I often think now as an arch, I should have done linguistics and things like this. Linguistics itself tells so many things about boundaries. Who, yes, no, no's, and
really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, Louise Hercus's work should.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. As I think about site patterning, for example, it's going to be here or something. You go to a community and there's a whole different patterning, maybe in the river sort of thing, and that's where all the sites are.
Yeah.
So much that's there. Boundaries, for example, the Kalkadoon Mitakootie. On the Kalkadoon people are the rocky areas from Mount Isa towards Cloncurry, and then there's Cloncurry, the plains people in the Cloncurry River. But that outcrop is Kajabi, exactly, Kajabi, through there. All the bottle trees that have been dropped by birds have grown. The Kalkadoon use that as their tree markers, and they put the Emu foot on their side. So you can do boundaries. So, yes, the hills are on that as well.
So these boundaries, could you actually, archaeologically, do you think it's unlikely you would see them most of the time?
I've seen more. We try to get them into the... But if you're going to go and steal a wife and get back, you're safe there because you're going to be...
But would you see that based on... So this is through what you know and anthropologists are saying and stuff like that, there's boundaries. But
absolutely.
Archaeologically, is there any material to show that?
The emu
footprint
on the western side of the boundary. But this is what I love, this stuff you don't learn in textbooks.
Yeah.
Here's an argument.
Great.
Oh, I love it. Go for it.
Good.
I know about those tree boundaries, and there are similar things elsewhere, but I don't think they're information markers for the local people. They know their country so well that they don't need to be told. A tree, whatever kind of tree it is, a couple of clanspeople 20 miles away could say, do you know such and such a tree? And they'd say, yeah, I know that tree. So they don't need the marker.
No, and as I said that, I said, well, that's the boundaries already known as that ridge before you come down the things, but they are there.
I think they're warnings for travellers.
I wonder that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
For unknown.
So-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good on you.
Travellers is important. You think of the number of tribes who use, or language groups who use the word for no to characterise a language. Wiradjuri. Wirai is no. So Wiradjuri means the people who use Wirai to say no. And that's because outsiders need to know that.
And that's what Louise taught me. You know, so you have a thing of, she was defining or how did she, her terminology of, you know your boundaries, and then there's a...
Yeah, other people who need to know from time to time.
Yeah. Because you could get into a lot of trouble, couldn't you? If you go into someone's territory without requesting first and stuff like that, then...
Absolutely.
Yeah, and yet strangers travel. Trade, initiation, ceremony.
Yeah.
So they need to know.
Yeah, but that's a very formalised process, isn't it? So you can't just
But you need to know the markers. You might. The songline will tell you that somewhere in this area there's a boundary, or not exactly a boundary. That's a white fella's thing, but a zone, a marginal zone. But you don't know exactly where it is that you should stop within that. So that markers will tell you.
And for a plug for our Indigenous partnerships here at ANU, this is important why I think community archaeologies are important. Working, and I don't like that word community archaeology, Indigenous, want for a better thing, but working, having priorities of our communities as the heritage archaeological or works done, so that we can actually get this information out, because we're still very westernised in how we look and see and interpret. And I think we can get so much more collectively, and it is our privilege to learn, and if people are willing to share, to do these projects that are looking at, some of these things that aren't classically, like these ring trees, which have been around forever, and now we're racing to try to get them recorded and inserted. And on that one alone, so the ring trees, it's something I'm saying we should keep to ourselves, our communities, and interpret ourselves too. As we go anyway. But that's a privilege of what we're looking and studying and learning about the past. But we've got some ready answers from some of our mob.